Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the OECD, and thank you very much for joining us today for our 2025 OECD Competition Open Day. My name is Misha, very pleased to be your host today, and to see so many of you, new and familiar faces, and hopefully for some really engaging discussions on important topics, particularly at a time where the landscape around competition enforcement and policy is really evolving rapidly. We know there are so many different parts of the competition community here, so we hope that you were able to take advantage of the networking breakfast this morning to get to know each other, and of course many more opportunities today during the lunch as well as the cocktail reception tonight. Before we proceed with our program, we do have a special video message from the OECD Secretary-General, Mathias Cormann. He unfortunately had an unexpected commitment that prevented him from being here today, but he was very keen to share his thoughts on this occasion. Becky.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all, a very warm welcome to this 2025 edition of the OECD Competition Day, which is an opportunity for us to showcase the OECD's work on competition law and policy to policymakers, practitioners and researchers. Promoting competitive, well-functioning markets is a core part of the OECD's DNA. We support policymakers in ensuring effective competition law enforcement and pro-competitive regulatory frameworks, to foster innovation and efficiency, to ensure consumers and workers get a fair deal, to open up new opportunities for businesses, to boost productivity, and ultimately to lay the foundation for stronger long-term economic growth. Our latest analysis published last year shows that competitive intensity in markets has been declining across the OECD. Between 2005 and 2018, the rate of market entry by new firms dropped by 1.3 percentage points in 16 OECD countries, with the decline being more pronounced in digital industries. In the EU, average markups by firms have increased by 7% between 2000 and 2019 and are particularly high in markets with high merger and acquisition activity by larger firms. This increase is driven by a subset of highly productive firms that are strongly integrated in global markets and rich in knowledge-based intangible assets such as software and patents, which can represent a significant barrier to entry. The competitiveness of markets around the world is also being held back by distortionary barriers to trade. Import restrictive measures, including tariffs, quotas, and stricter customs procedures, are on the rise. And as of mid-October 2024, these restrictions represented nearly 12% of the value of global imports, up from just 0.6% in 2009. Addressing these trends will require an ambitious and comprehensive approach, pairing competition law enforcement efforts with the systematic assessment of current and proposed regulations for their impacts on competition and consideration of pro-competitive alternatives, well-targeted incentives to firms to invest in research and development, including for new startups with promising technologies, bridging divides in digital technology access and connectivity, including through further investments in broadband and skills training, and a continuing commitment to a global level playing field and a rules-based global trading system in good working order. To support competition, policymakers in advancing these priorities, last year the OECD organized dialogue and conducted research on several key priorities. First, on ensuring competition enforcement is fully effective in protecting innovation in fast-changing markets. The OECD has collected experiences by competition agencies in assessing how a merger will affect innovation incentives and product pipelines and grappling with uncertainty in this assessment. This includes Chile's new approach to assessing innovation as set out in its authority's updated merger guidelines. It is also important to ensure that competition law does not create disincentives for beneficial, pro-competitive joint research efforts by companies. The OECD supports dialogue on the application of measures such as the EU's horizontal block exemption regulations, which allow for research and development agreements to foster innovation while ensuring consumer benefits and preserving competition. Second, on tackling the competition challenges associated with generative AI adoption. AI can increase the productivity of firms by accelerating decision-making processes and automating tasks, and help strengthen competition by cutting down intermediary costs and equipping consumers with better information. Recent OECD analysis suggests that AI could contribute between 0.4 and 0.9% annually to aggregate labour productivity. However, competition agencies will also need to address the risk of entrenched market power for AI developers and anti-competitive conduct using AI as a tool. The OECD is supporting peer learning among competition agencies as they address these concerns, and we are providing analysis on how data, computing capabilities, and foundational machine learning algorithms shape competitive dynamics in markets affected by AI. Third, on strengthening international cooperation among competition authorities. The OECD is helping competition agencies better coordinate their efforts to address competition concerns in digital markets which transcend international borders, to enhance the impact and the effectiveness of their investigations, to reduce duplication for businesses, and to prevent spillover effects of anti-competitive practices into other markets around the world. Our latest statistics show that international cooperation agreements between competition agencies almost doubled from 132 in 2012 to 258 in 2022. The right procedures and practices are needed to make the most of these agreements and to ensure they reach their full potential in terms of ensuring well-coordinated cross-border enforcement efforts. Towards this, the OECD's recommendation on international cooperation on competition investigations provides practical guidance. In conclusion, the OECD continues to provide competition policymakers with the data, evidence-based policy recommendations, and platforms for sharing experiences needed to ensure that our competition frameworks can be as effective as possible and as we need them to be, to foster dynamic, innovative markets, new opportunities for people, and better outcomes for consumers. My best wishes to you for an engaging, forward-looking, positive and productive day of discussions. Thank you.
I would like to now welcome Carmine Di Noia, the Director of the Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs here at the OECD, to provide us some introductory remarks. Thanks, Carmine.
Thank you, and dear ambassadors here, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Firstly, thank you to Secretary-General for his insightful words, highlighting how competition drives innovation and growth. And I particularly appreciated his focus on the need to adapt to digitalization, AI, and the green transition, which are really for us key challenges that we must address now. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this 2025 OECD Competition Open Day. This event is an opportunity for all of us to exchange ideas, reflect on key competition challenges, and highlight the OECD work in supporting effective competition policies globally. Now, I think we can all agree on the relevance of competition policy as a tool for achieving important economic objectives, as also Mathias Cormann has just outlined. Yet, as competition authorities navigate an increasingly complex global economy, as we can see, also we have seen in the last years and in the last months, it's essential to understand how decision-making, technology, and overall the policy frameworks evolve. Consumer decision-making is one area where competition policy must adapt. Understanding financial behavior, consumer biases, and the role of information asymmetries will be crucial in shaping effective competition enforcement. And we are particularly pleased today to host our keynote speaker, Professor Kathleen Vohs, to share some reflection on these issues. But at the same time, geopolitical shifts, supply chain distortions, resurgence of industrial policy, and then rapid technological advancement, including actually generative AI, where we are working a lot, are deeply transforming market dynamics. And these changes necessitate some fresh approach, fresh perspective on competition policy, including reassessing regulatory approaches, the integration of competition policy into broader political and governmental objectives, and ensuring enforcement mechanism remain effective, a key issue. One of today's key discussions will focus on generative AI and competition policy. Now, AI-driven business models present both, as everything in life, opportunities and risks. So from efficiency gains to potential anti-competitive behavior. So how should regulators balance innovation with fair market access? How can competition authorities address these concerns without, stifling technological progress? And these are fundamental questions that require a real and thoughtful debate. Also, we will discuss, with globalization, comes the challenge of regulating cross-border mergers, particularly in digital markets where data and network effects may create significant barriers to entry. We're just discussing, and actually many areas. Our panels today will explore the complexities of cross-border merger reviews and the evolving standard of proof in competition law. And as markets become more interconnected, ensuring consistency and cooperation between jurisdictions is really important, is paramount to maintaining a fair and effective competition. Today, we also launch, I sell my carpet, the sixth edition of the OECD Competition Trends report, which provides key insights based on enforcement data from 69 jurisdictions worldwide. Now, some key findings from the report include a continuous, and increase in leniency applications, reaching actually their highest level since 2016. This increase was observed in many jurisdictions, and with particularly strong growth in OECD countries. A growing share, second issue, of bid rigging cases, which in most jurisdictions actually is a violation per se. So with the construction industry seeing the most cartel decisions in 2023, bid rigging represented 44% of the total cartel infringement decisions in 2023, increasing from 39% in 2022. And then, as a major, another major point, a decline in merger notifications, but actually sustained a high level of merger interventions, including a rise in withdrawn mergers and remedies imposed. In 2023, 3.2% of the mergers reviewed were cleared with remedies, which is the highest percentage since the survey began. So this report, again, supports, I think, for all of us, really informed policy making and ensures competition authorities remain equipped to address emerging challenges. So I encourage all of you to engage with its findings and integrate its insights into your work. And again, this is also a path, so also improving for the next editions. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear ambassadors, so today's discussion will provide a vital forum, as it has done also in past editions, to reflect on these pressing issues, exchange perspectives, and really at the OECD we believe this is essential, so having a dialogue, informed dialogue, and advance competition policy for the benefit of consumers, businesses, and economies worldwide. So competition policy now actually, and I did some when I studied economics at UPenn. I was telling professor that actually the first paper of my PhD was on network externalities and actually implicit, what I call implicit mergers among stock exchanges. But one of the issue important is that barriers, to entry are a problem. So I don't want to create a barrier to entry for Professor Vohs by keeping my speech very long. So I cut it here. I thank you for your participation and really look forward to the insights shares throughout the day. So thank you very much.
Well, after Carmine said that, I don't want to be a barrier to entry either to Professor Vohs, but just to introduce our keynote for today, I'm very, very excited to welcome Professor Kathleen Vohs. Professor Vohs is the Distinguished McKnight University Professor from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota and is also the Land O'Lakes Professor of Marketing. Professor Vohs will be speaking to us today about the hidden cost of decision-making and some of the surprising ways that the process of decision-making affect control and rationality, which should be very interesting for our work here today. Professor Vohs, I welcome you up here.
Good morning. Bonjour. Thank you to the director. Thank you to Secretary-General, to Misha. Thank you to you all for being here. Today we're going to talk about decision-making, and let me see if my slides will come. Yeah, moment. Yeah. And first I'd like us to think about food. And I'd like you to think about how many decisions about food you make every day. And if you're like the average person, you'll come up with a number around 15 to 20. But in matter of fact, when researchers monitor people through the course of their everyday lives, they find that people make more than 200 decisions about food every day, because decisions about food include eat it cold or heat it up, eat half or eat all of it, or one of my favorites, over the sink or in the car. Indeed, some of these decisions about food could be happening simply because we're trying to order coffee. And now food is one category, but one category, albeit an important one. Clearly, we're making decisions in the rest of our lives as well as part of our professions, for example. We see decision-making showing up in the relationship sphere, where people more and more are rejecting arranged marriages in favor of marriages based on romantic attraction, reflecting an insistence on choice. Democracy can be seen through the lens of choice, people seeking to have the choice of their political leaders. Across countries and cultures, decades of research is clear. People like, prefer, and seek out having choices. At the same time, people describe decision-making as difficult, demanding, and exhausting, leading me to wonder whether we are now in an era of a paradox of choice, that consumers seek out choice, and the marketplace has served up plenty of it, but it is not clear that having all these choices is making people better off psychologically. Although the benefits of choice have long been acknowledged, the cost had not, and I embarked on a series of experiments to understand the hidden cost of decision-making for wisdom, rationality, and optimal decisions. In our experiments, we had people come to the laboratory, which was outfitted to look like a miniature store, and they were asked to make choices. So they may be asked to make a choice between yellow socks and red socks and blue socks, green t-shirts and white t-shirts, blue t-shirts and black t-shirts, vanilla candles and pine candles, lavender candles and cinnamon candles. Now, we had another group of people who came into the same laboratory and looked at the same products, but they didn't make choices, and instead they indicated how often they'd used those products in the past year. Now, in order to understand wise, rational, and optimal decision-making, we turn to a task that involves trading off the future for now. And in it, we gave people a new health drink. This health drink was made of vinegar, water, and orange drink mix, powdered mix. And by virtue of having vinegar in it, it was both healthy and did not taste very good. But we know from decades of scholarship that doing something that will benefit you in the long run, even if it feels unpleasant in the short run, is a classic context in which to understand optimal decision making. And so we monitored how much of the healthy but unpleasant drink our lab participants consumed and found that the act of making decisions in the initial phase of the experiment reduced their healthy consumption by 2/3. Now, another way to understand optimal decision-making and rationality is to see how much emotions are driving people's decision-making. And so here we looked at emotional product features. Emotional product features promise fun, fantasy, pleasure, and excitement. And overweighting them in the decision-making process is generally considered suboptimal because they can lead to consumer regret. So here we asked people to consider making purchases with their own money of different chocolate bars. Some, like these on your screen, were perfectly normal, but were on the plain side. They had plain flavors and they had plain packaging. Or they could purchase chocolates that look like this, that were more expensive, but also were more appealing. They had more attractive packaging, and they came in a variety of exciting flavors. And what we saw is that after making decisions, people used their emotional system more when they opted for their purchases and purchased more of the emotionally appealing and more expensive options. Now, another way to understand rational decision-making is to examine people's hesitation or unwillingness to make a decision at all. One form of this is to stay with the status quo. When people stay with the status quo, they continue on a decision or action plan that had already been decided. And it's generally considered a suboptimal decision-making style because it reflects decision passivity and a neglect of engaging in the decision-making process. And so in this experiment, we asked MBA students to consider an investment fund to which they had been contributing and that was underperforming. And they were given the option to change to a new fund or to stay with the fund that they had already been contributing to. And we found that the act of making decision earlier in our experiment led people to prefer the decision passive option of sticking with the status quo more often. And now, after my laboratory produced this evidence of decision fatigue, scholars in multiple other disciplines started seeing it too. Scholars in finance, in medicine, in education, and law. For example, one study out of Columbia University examined 900,000 employees in over 650 companies and the decisions they were making around their retirement savings. In the United States, these are called 401k plans. And the researchers examined how many offerings employers provided to their employees and how much that affected employees' participation, finding that when employees are faced with more potential retirement options, they simply drop out of retirement savings altogether, so much so that for every 10 funds an employer offered to its employees, 3% more employees dropped out of participating at all. Now, 401k funds have multiple advantages for employees, including tax protection and growth of earnings, and so dropping out of retirement savings is indeed a suboptimal decision. Researchers publishing in the Journal of the American Medical Association found evidence of decision fatigue among physicians. Namely, they looked at the way that physicians prescribe antibiotics throughout the course of their work shift, and they found that antibiotics are prescribed more often the longer the physician has been on the job that day. The top line on your screen is overall prescriptions for antibiotics, and the bottom line, importantly, represent prescriptions for antibiotics for conditions for which antibiotics are never warranted. The idea here is that many patients go into a doctor's office hoping, expecting, and perhaps demanding a prescription for them, and that as the day wears on, physicians are less able to resist these demands from their patients. In the United States, 1 out of every 8 patients leaves the doctor's office with a prescription for antibiotics, and nearly half of them do not need it. The WHO concluded that there are 5 million deaths in 2019 linked to antibiotic-resistant disease, a number only going up. You can see decision fatigue in children as well. A study of 4 million Danish school children over the course of 4 years found that when students take an exam later in the day, they perform worse on it. The same exam is given to school children over and over and over again, and they found that if students are taking the exam later, their scores drop. For every hour later that it's given, it's as if their family makes $1,000 less in income, and as if the child has been in school 10 fewer days. More evidence from the way that decision fatigue affects health behaviors comes from a study of 14 million hand sanitizing opportunities among 4,000 nurses in the United States. Researchers found that the longer that nurses had been on their shift, the less likely they were to sanitize their hands. In fact, for every 10 times they sanitized their hands in the morning, later in their shift they did so only 6 times, estimating an increase in 600,000 unnecessary infections and a cost of $12 billion. And last, a study of 1,000 colonoscopies found that physicians are worse at detecting potentially dangerous precancerous nodules called polyps, so much so that an exam given at 3 p.m. will find 45% fewer polyps than the same exam given at 9 a.m., with clear implications for disease, health, and mortality. So let's think about what's going on. As a decision-making scientist, I want to understand sort of what brings these ideas together, and what it seems is that when people are decision fatigued, they slide into a pattern of favoring easy decisions or no decisions at all. And a study of voting behavior demonstrates this well. Economists were able to take advantage of a natural experiment in the city of San Diego, California, whereby the same contest was listed in different places on the ballot. As a result, they could examine voting patterns on the contest as a function of where it appeared on the ballot, with the idea that being later on the ballot, our voters would be decision fatigued when they get to that item. And what they found is evidence of easy and no decision-making patterns. So, for instance, when a contest is listed later on the ballot, the candidate who is listed first in the list of names is more likely to be voted in. When a contest is listed later on the ballot and it proposes a change, for example, to a state statute, then voters reject that change more likely, which is another way of thinking about status quo. They want to stay with the status quo. And lastly, voters simply skip items the longer they have been voting and move down the ballot. Again, the same contests in different places. So now that we understand that people are making easy and sometimes no decisions at all, what can be done to combat decision fatigue? And some ideas come to us from a study of 1,100 judges. Judges were considering whether to grant prisoners parole, that is, whether they should be released from prison. And researchers saw a particular pattern, that early in the judge's workday, their decisions to grant prisoners parole were at about 65%. But as they saw cases and continued to make decisions, their decision-making style changed such that they were keeping the prisoners in prison by the end of their immediate work shift. This, however, changed when the judges had gotten a break, this time in the form of a meal, and their decisions went back up to their own baseline, the baseline that was observed earlier in the day. So one idea from this is that simply having a break from making decisions can be an antidote to decision fatigue. Another idea comes from a study of 1.8 million school children in Los Angeles who were tracked over 6 years. Researchers found that children learn more of the classes that they have earlier in the day, so much so that when students have math class in the first or second period, it then improves their math grades and their math exam scores at the end of the year. And lest you think this is just about math, it is not. They found the same pattern with English language classes. Having them early in the day produced better results on grades and also on English-related exams. So one implication from these findings is that when you have important and consequential decisions, to move them forward in your day so that they can take up your decision-making capacity. Now, another way to think about offsetting decision fatigue is to simply not get that fatigued in the first place, to try to limit the decisions that you're making. And an example of how to do this comes from President Obama. President Obama was interviewed by Michael Lewis, there on the left, while he was at the White House, and he told Michael Lewis that he'd made a number of changes since coming to the White House, namely that he started wearing only gray or blue suits. And he told the White House chef to decide what he'd be eating that day, noting, "I'm trying to pare down decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm wearing or what I'm eating because I have too many other decisions to make." Mark Zuckerberg also notes the decision-saving capacity of having a work uniform and the reasons why, in talking about the reasons why he wears a gray hoodie or a gray t-shirt. Elizabeth Warren, a senator in the United States and sometimes presidential hopeful, brags that she can get dressed in 4 minutes because she has the same outfit simply in different colors. Indeed, President Obama was so enamored with the idea of not getting decision fatigued that he used to fantasize about retiring from politics and opening up a shop in Hawaii that sold one thing and one thing only: white t-shirts, size medium. Now, of course, moving beyond the sartorial, there are other ways to think about reducing decision-making in our lives, and one would be to take control of our digital devices. Turning off notifications would be one such idea. Although many of the decisions consumers have to make are not under their control to opt out. You may ask whether AI will come to the rescue, and perhaps it will, although there are reasons to be dubious. When e-commerce first took off, it promised to revolutionize the way that consumers shop, and indeed, in many ways, it has. But what it hasn't done is reduced decision-making strain and decision fatigue. A study of 5,000 global consumers just in 2024 found that fully 84% of them are frustrated with what they see online and find that their search filters do not work or that they do not trust the results that they are given. It is perhaps no surprise then that consumers are foregoing and abandoning their purchases online in a variety of product categories. And it's not simply that consumers are not purchasing. Increasingly, they're acting as if they're locked in, as if there are no other options, when in fact, of course, there are. Economists studied 700 million consumer transactions and found that as companies are providing more offerings and more variety, consumers are increasingly buying the same thing over and over. That means they're not comparison shopping, and that means they're not forcing companies to compete for their business. Some companies are recognizing consumers' desire to offset or limit decision fatigue by producing offerings that have limited to no choice, including a restaurant here in London, or perhaps more famously, a restaurant here in Paris, the motto at which is, "Here you can have anything you like, as long as it's steak, salad, and chips." I leave you with a reminder of the opportunity cost of decision fatigue, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Vohs. That was incredibly fascinating exploration of decision-making, decision fatigue, and of course many, many concepts around customer switching, customer inertia that are of real importance for the work that we do and the people in this room do. We do have a little bit of time, so I am happy to invite if there are any questions from the audience at this stage. Would someone like to pose a question? This might warm us up for the rest of the day as well, so please feel free to be brave, feel free to ask a question. Please just pop up your hand. One question at the back, thanks, Sophia.
Hi, sorry, I never thought I'd use my neuroscience degree this early in the morning at the OECD. But yeah, I guess my question is in terms of kind of big data and big information and the Internet of Things, how there's so much information that consumers are facing. And part of what my intro to econ class taught me is that a perfect competitive market should be that way, where there's so many items that you can pick from as a consumer, but what neuroscience and your work also says is that that can lead to too many decisions to be made and too much information. And then on top of that, we're now dealing with the internet where there's a lot of information that might not be accurate, and you're forcing the consumer to make even more decisions about the accuracy of that information. So could you speak a little bit more on that?
Sure. I mean, I think in many ways I resonate with what you're saying, and it's an interesting idea that there's this additional layer of decision-making around the veracity or the credibility of the source. I wonder sometimes how much people do that, but I think they do. I think in the commerce space, they do, indeed. And I reflect on that study I just discussed of 5,000 consumers globally of not trusting what they see online, et cetera. I mean, I do think that it's like we have more and more options and they're more available to people now than ever before, but I'm not sure. I mean, I go back to what I said, like from a psychological standpoint, it's not clear to me that that's what's best for people in a psychological sense. And I think that there is something to be said for limiting choice, but perhaps that has to be somewhat on consumers' own volition. So kind of opting into limited choice, as some of the examples that I produced earlier. But you're right. I mean, there are some sort of strictures from economics that are somewhat at odds with some of the work that would suggest that what's good at a psychological level. Indeed, there is that tension.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Please feel free to pop up your hand.
In the meantime, I comment. No, this is interesting because in other areas, I was a commissioner in a securities commission. I mean, there is a point where some advantages then becomes maybe growing at an increasing rate and then decrease. Yeah. Information on financial markets. Okay, there is a point where, Luis Brandeis was saying sunlight is the best of disinfectants, so you need information. But then I think Luis Loss was saying too much sunlight can cause cancer. Flood the market with information is equivalent to not having information at all. Yeah. So there is, I think, this I would say similar in terms of analyzing, and so in a sense is a decision making. There is a point where, and I think this example you showed, I mean, I was really impressed, and also I thought that I'm teaching very early in the morning. Now I understand why students are good, not for me. It's simply because it's early in the morning. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I might throw one at you, Professor Vohs. Today, we've got a lot of discussions about AI and generative AI and other technologies like this. It was covered in the Secretary-General speech, Carmine, yourself. Yeah. Curious if you've already talked a little bit about the potential trade-offs of burden, but I'm wondering if you have any perspectives to share on whether AI or these types of technologies could actually help mitigate some of the costs around decision-making.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some, I don't want to be too pessimistic. In some utopian sense, yeah, for sure. But then you have to think, like, what would it be involved in that? And so for AI to be able to make the decisions for me, and we see this already, of course, in the digital landscape, it has to know a lot about me. And then we talk about issues of control, of course, and consent. And, I think ultimately who has the burden is really the question here. That is very thorny. I think in a way, we could think about AI being able to reduce decision fatigue, but that doesn't, I mean, so yes, in a sort of narrow sense, but then I think about like people as a whole and consumers and what's good for consumer well-being, and like it's not clear to me sometimes that the trade-offs there would be necessarily worth it, even if it could mitigate people feeling fatigue from having to make the decisions. But it is tough, and we see that with some of the consenting, et cetera. So it is tough. I mean, I certainly welcome ideas from people here and online, because I know you know more about this than I, but I do feel like that's fraught with trade-offs that are very important to consider.
Thank you.
To steal, but if there are there are comments now. Couple, yeah.
Okay, now we have maybe a few too many, but we can probably take one or two. Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah, thank you. Just a curiosity, I found super interesting the pattern of Zuckerberg, Obama, and we in Italy were super, like I recall this, I was a little kid, like we had the former president Berlusconi, he was always wearing the same suit, the same Armani suit, the blue navy suit. But now we had a lot of fuss about Zuckerberg changing completely because times are changing. And I just wanted to know your thought about that, because I found super interesting. There is this New York Times article from tech bro to MAGA rapper. So I was, he completely switched the style.
Sorry, Zuckerberg doesn't wear the T-shirts anymore? Is that what you're telling me?
New shirts, yeah, new shirts, new hair.
New shirts. Oh, well, maybe that explains a few things. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I guess I can't comment on that. But that is interesting. I will tell you, though, having worked on this for like 15, 20 years, having the work uniform or the work wardrobe is so helpful. People adopt it, they like it, it's easy, and in any case, that would be one sort of lighthearted, but maybe one suggestion going forward.
We are just closing in on time, unfortunately, but maybe just in 30 seconds, Professor Vohs, we are all working on in the competition space here, but of course we are all consumers and we are all people making hundreds of, maybe thousands of decision-making decisions a day. Is there a life hack, a tip or two you can tell us to help us reduce some of that cognitive load?
Well, we talked about one already. Front-loading important decisions is, I think, key. I mean, because you can't avoid it, right? You have to make decisions. Try not to get mired in decision quicksand, where like small decisions all of a sudden feel like big decisions. And for me, that would be in travel decisions. And then I think I would say last, setting up some sort of leaning into the status quo idea that I mentioned several times, set up sort of defaults for yourself so that you don't really have to make decisions around coffee or foods. Some people have adopted a schedule of if it's Tuesday, I'm having chicken for dinner. So things of that nature, try to routinize things.
Thank you very much, Professor Vohs. Please put your hands, round of applause for
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really huge thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I will try to be very brief, as we really want to dive into our panel and start navigating the future of competition by competition authorities' heads. As the DAF director previously mentioned, we are launching today the 6th edition of the Competition Trends report. You can find it in the back in the room, but also online together with the Excel database. My name is Aura Garcia from the OECD Secretariat, and I will just take 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about it. Carmine already did a great job presenting a few of our findings, but as you all know, this is our flagship report. It covers competition trends in enforcement in 69 jurisdictions, so basically covering almost all the competition enforcement in the world. It includes more than 30 variables on cartels, abuse of dominance, mergers, market studies. So we strongly believe that this is a relevant tool, a very unique database that supports informed decision-making in competition policy around the world. Very quickly, what's new in this report? This time we have an in-focus chapter on resources, on competition authorities' budgets, thank you, and staff. And basically, we decided to cover this topic this year because this is one of the most consistent trends that we have found since we are collecting the data. Of course, as you know, trends always hide some heterogeneity among jurisdictions, but we wanted to explore potential reasons why there was this consistent increase in resources dedicated to competition enforcement. And we basically found that there are 4 potential reasons why this is happening. The first one is because competition authorities are receiving more powers and responsibilities. This is perhaps something that's going to be covered in a little bit. Then the second one is because authorities are increasingly looking for proactive methods to detect anti-competitive conduct. The third one is the increasing complexity, improving infringements, and reviewing mergers. We are going to see it as well when we discuss some cross-border issues later today. And the fourth one is simply because we also have in our sample competition authorities that have new regimes or regimes that are under consolidation. On top of this, the report includes the usual main trends in competition enforcement, covering the key indicators and developments in 2023. One final feature that is new to this year report is that we have a final chapter that includes one-page snapshots for the most relevant indicators in the 4 regions that we covered: the Americas, Asia Pacific, Europe, and Middle East and Africa. The snapshots contain information on the main enforcement variables, averages, medians, to try to cover a little bit for the heterogeneity across jurisdictions for the previous 5 years. So again, I invite you all to take a look at the report. You can scan the QR code that's appearing now to check it online and see what other trends and interesting observations we came up from analyzing the 2023 data that competition authorities kindly share with us. So thank you for your attention. And now for the main course of this session, I will give the floor to Ori Schwartz.